Welcome to Inside Independent Publishing with IBPA. I'm your host, Christopher Locke. I'm also the IBPA Director of Membership and Member Services. Okay, so advertising on Google, Facebook, Instagram, and other various social media sites can be exceptional exposure for your books and possibly lead to more book sales. But which platforms are better for garnering sales as compared to visibility? And what types of images and copy work best for each site? Also, how long is the ideal time to run an ad? Ingram Content Group's Senior Manager of Consumer Products and Services Development, Aaron Cox, visits Inside Independent Publishing with IBPA to answer these questions and more. Welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat with you about this.
Awesome. Well, so the reason I wanted to do this particular episode is we have a lot of independent publishers out there and author publishers, and they're great at publishing a book, but their expertise may not be in marketing. But suddenly they don't have the budget to pay for someone to do the marketing, and suddenly they find themselves, oh wow, I'm doing all this on my own. So I wanted to, you have such an expertise in this topic. I just wanted to talk to you. What are some, savvy strategies? So I'm going to go through each of the various sites that I just mentioned, and we'll just do it. Let's just jump right in with Google advertising. Okay. So based on your experience, with Google advertising, what is it best for? Is it garnering book sales? Is it for visibility or something else?
So, one of the biggest things when you are putting a book out into the world is the number one thing that you first have to do and think about is letting people know that your book even exists before they can make a decision about whether the book is the right one for them, whether they want to spend money on it. They have to know it exists. And that's where Google comes in. Google is probably the best one out there in terms of the platforms for visibility, for awareness, for becoming the book that they looked up one time and it follows them around on all the sites. You've looked at a pair of shoes and then that pair of shoes follows you everywhere you go. That's a Google Display feature. Google Display and Google Search, they're slightly different. Obviously, Google Search is for people who are looking for something pretty close or similar to whatever product you're putting out there. So if you had prescriptive nonfiction on a specific topic and you ran a Google Search ad, you would be funneling people who are already kind of in the market for that to get to find your book where you have it. Google Display is a great one for a lot of impressions where you want as many people as possible to be introduced to the idea that your book exists. When we talk about a marketing life cycle, the old sort of rule of thumb was someone needed to see a product, whether it was that pair of shoes I talked about or a book, about 3 times before they started thinking about buying it. Now, because we have so many more places that we're as consumers getting bombarded, we have all the social platforms, we still have print, we have TV, but we also have a lot of streaming. That the number of touch points sometimes that someone needs to be exposed to something can be more than 6. So Google Display is a great way of getting a lot of those touch points in. So someone keeps seeing that book wherever they're going online. So for Google, I say is a great place to kind of start an awareness campaign.
Okay.
The other thing you asked about was length. Google Search in particular, you really need to be thinking about running for a minimum of 4 weeks. Longer is always better with that one. If that sounds like a huge campaign, you don't have to. Google and Meta both operate on daily spends. So you don't have to spend a lot every day. You can still keep your overall budget fairly low. What you're doing with both of those, whether it's Google, whether it's Meta, which would be Facebook and Instagram, is you're letting those platforms get smarter and deliver your ad to a tighter and tighter subset of people who are more likely to click on it. So we always recommend going longer, but Google Search is probably the one that you need to make sure you're running the longest to really give it time. A Google Display would then be another one that recommend 3 to 4 weeks on that one.
Yeah, it's interesting because with those different ads, Google will recommend, it'll say, if you spent whatever, $20 more a day, you could get this many more conversions. And it's tempting because you're like, well, I do want to get more people getting my product. But I guess it's about just testing things out. Like maybe you just try that and then you really watch it and you go, okay, did that actually happen? Because I do know that, like you said, you can set an amount, and if you don't set a low amount, like things could get out of hand quickly if you're like, I don't know, let's just spend 1,000 a day, and you're like, wait a second, you may start losing money.
Yeah, exactly. And you bring up a really great point, which is one of the things you can do with any of these is test. And in that case, what you'd be doing is you initially set it up small amount and you're trying different things. You're trying maybe different images, you're trying some different approaches, some different positioning, and you run them for shorter. And then you end whichever ones you just don't think are working, whichever ones aren't converting. But the flip side of that is you need to be ready to run the ones that are working longer. This is where I'll circle back to one of the truths of marketing is that it is not about instant gratification. So you have to let something kind of simmer for a while, for enough people to see it and have had time to think about it and for it to start converting. And so you just have to be willing to set your expectations realistically in that sphere. But to your point, starting several of them and being comfortable saying, oh, this one's not so great. This one's not performing as well as this one. And this is the one that I'm going to commit to. And that's the one that I'm going to extend or add budget to.
Yeah. And I'm imagining that if you have Google Analytics set up on your site, it'll be better for you in terms of just kind of being able to track things and seeing traffic, going more. And so that's probably something before you start an ad that you would want to do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of free services out there where you can, to your point, you can create tracking links, and it's going to let you know in a way that most sites won't necessarily do how many of the people who clicked on that link where they ended up going if they actually converted to the other one. As privacy laws are changing, as cookies have disappeared, a lot of the tracking ability that a lot of digital marketing have been built on and kind of taken for granted, a lot of those insights have disappeared. And so things like tracking links and using those as the link that you are directing people in your ad to use will give you some of those insights back.
So for Google ads, like for the search ads, you can pick a headline and description. And then I know that they will find ways to optimize. Well, what are the ones that are getting the highest conversion? But just starting out, what do you recommend if I'm a publisher, I want to, have more visibility and or get book sales? What should you be putting in your headlines and descriptions?
You are looking for the sweet spot between something that is not so specific that there are only 5 people who are ever going to look for it, and something that's so broad that too many people are looking for it, or that you're going to blow through your budget really quickly. So an example of the latter, and something that we'll see on some of the ones that are run through our platform, is people using keywords or search terms like book or mystery book. That is not a super useful term, because while that yes, it's going to separate it from someone who's looking for, say, shoes, that is such a massive category that you are going to end up spending your budget on people clicking on that are not interested at all in your type of book or have a very different idea of what that means. So something that might be more effective when you're thinking about about search terms is thinking about comp authors, thinking about comp titles or series, and thinking about recognizable descriptions of your book, say cozy historical mystery, as your search term instead of mystery book. If you are writing in certain genres where tropes are a big deal, that's something to consider, is what are the tropes in your, and obviously we think of that a lot of times with romance, but that exists for thrillers, for mysteries, for sci-fi, for fantasy. That also exist in some of the prescriptive nonfiction. We wouldn't call them tropes, but we could say certain, who is the target audience for that. So think about the descriptors, think about comps, think about the audience that you're looking at, and try and find the sweet spot. And Google's going to do that a little bit for you in the ones that it starts to use and how it starts to serve, because it's not going to keep serving it to people who are not using the search term, one of the search terms that you put in there. Google is constantly trying to optimize your ad. So what it's going to ask you to do is it's going to give you an opportunity to enter in multiple headlines and multiple descriptions and a whole bunch of keywords. We recommend you think about using at least 20, maybe 30. You don't have to do 100, but enough in there that you're giving Google something sticky that it can really test.
Okay. What about a headline, buy my book, it was really good, I liked it?
Well, I wouldn't recommend that headline in any marketing ever.
Okay.
Whether it's on Google or anywhere else, unless you are a celebrity who moves books by the tens of thousands by saying something like that.
So maybe I should stay director of membership and not marketing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we always start somewhere.
Yeah. And sometimes we stay there.
Well, and I will say Google in particular can get pretty touchy about super clickbaity terms. They don't even like certain punctuation. So they don't want exclamation points. They don't want stuff that looks super salesy. Because from their perspective, your search or the Google display is also supposed to be a value add to the people who are using Google, not just this barrage of sales. So they want it to align with the user experience and not just feel like a bunch of ads hawking different things.
Okay. Well, I also want to ask, what's the link? Like your ad's going to have a link. So did you send it to just your main page on your website, or should you send it to an actual retail site where that's like, this is exactly where you buy the book? Like where should you send people?
So one thing I want to talk about when we talk about these links are calls to action, or CTAs is sometimes how you'll see that. And that's the thing you're asking someone who sees your ad or your promotion to do. And you should try and limit yourself to one of those. So if you are running an ad, that's the button that says buy, that's the link that says learn more. And that's pretty much your one shot to get the user to go on a journey with you. So your highest conversion is going to be getting rid of any friction between the time they click that button and the time they can purchase your book. That's always going to be your highest conversion. So if you are trying to drive the biggest number of sales, I'd link directly to a retailer, and I link to one that is very easy to purchase from. Now, if you're trying to shift market share, and let's say you want to shift away from a certain retailer and do more, let's say, direct sales, then I say go to, if you have a storefront, if you have a page where they can buy it directly from you, know that you are asking them to go through some extra steps that they might not if they were using a different retailer. Perhaps they haven't purchased from you before. Perhaps that's going to make them think about it. That's okay. Just have reasonable expectations about the things that you're asking them to do after they click that button.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Facebook advertising. So I wanted to start with Facebook used to be a bit more popular, and I wanted to see, is it still a good place to advertise your books, even though it's not quite the juggernaut it once was?
Facebook is super interesting because Facebook is where we see a ton of actual clicks. When I talked about Google being the place to build awareness and kind of use that as sort of a foundation for your campaign to start driving awareness, Facebook is really good at converting those impressions or the people seeing the ad to clicks. You tend to get higher rates there. Part of that has to do with Facebook's targeting. Part of that has to do with the way they're identifying their audience. Part of that has to do with the Facebook audience itself. It's just more likely to click. So in terms of digital advertising, if you want to get people to a retailer or to your landing page or your site, it's a really good option for that. So that one, when we talk about kind of building a campaign, that's the next stage.
Well, are there particular types of genres that do work well on Facebook, and then other ones where you're like, oh, that may not work as well?
We haven't necessarily found that to be true.
Mm.
Instead, what we've found to be true is it has so much to do with the image that you're using and the way that you're talking about it. Facebook ads, I think there's something to be said for the way that you're talking in them, that you're not necessarily approaching it as this really formal sales language. Whereas Google doesn't want it to be super salesy, Facebook should be a little more approachable. This is someone that you can trust. This is a good recommend. This is not someone in a blue blazer like I'm wearing right now, showing you what you should buy as if they have no vested interest. So it's a place where you can use emojis. It's a place where you can use shorter descriptions or use super tropey stuff, or use if you have a great review line or you have a great blurb from someone recommending it, that's a good option for it.
Okay, that's interesting, because there are many different, you can use images, videos, and text. So it sounds like images work well. Videos, like what kinds of stuff should we be posting that's the thing that people are going to go, oh my gosh, I got to get this book?
Videos are great. What I will say is, we're talking about Facebook, but we could talk about Meta, which would be Facebook and Instagram. And one thing to keep in mind is Instagram in particular, because it's such a visual platform, video and images are super high performing there. That's more than words, more than emojis. Mm-hmm. Thinking about a visual presentation is going to get you farther with Instagram. Facebook kind of splits the difference on that a little bit. You're still going to want a good image. You're still going to want to be aware of how Facebook is going to serve that image. The user on desktop sees a slightly different layout than a user on mobile or a user on, say, a tablet. And Facebook is going resizes some of those. So you always want to make sure that if you have this image and you spend a lot of time in it, make sure that the most important part of that image is in the very middle, because that's the only thing that's going to survive all the different ways that they crop.
Okay. And then in terms of, videos, obviously, and we talked about budget. So some people might be like, I don't have the budget to create this super awesome, like movie trailers are amazing, but they're like, I can't create that. So, is it okay if you're an author, or if you're a publisher and you ask your author, how unprofessional does it look if you've got literally just a shot of you, I don't know, whatever, in front of your books, and you're talking about them or something? How professional, quote unquote, did the video need to be?
I mean, I think Facebook and Instagram are great for looking like a real person who wrote a real book talking about it. Make it personal, make it something that feels that it's something that they can connect to, that it's not been sort of generated by a hive mind, but instead it links to someone talking about it and saying, hey, I'd love for you to consider finding out more about this, or I'm so excited that this book is coming out. Real life, real people enthusiasm carries a lot of weight. And I would argue there are some drawbacks to being too polished when it comes to those platforms. Unless you are Universal Studios, where there's an expectation that you should be presenting a certain way, I think there's something to be said for looking for reflecting what you are and what you've done.
Okay. Well, we talked about time for the Google ads. So you said about 4 weeks for that one. Is Facebook the same way?
So Facebook is one where, again, you can do the testing. You can set up a couple ones and say you want to run it for a week and see when you want to stop it, which one you want to end. But Facebook is another one where you don't want to, if you have a set amount of budget, prepare to do smaller daily spends to run that longer rather than big daily spends for a short amount of time. And the reason for that is Facebook's going to spend probably the first week figuring out who to send your ad to. So if you are planning, you have several $100s and you're going to spend it all in 1 week on Facebook, what you've essentially done is pay Facebook to learn how to deliver your ad and who should see your ad. And then you're not getting the benefit of your investment because right around the time that has really optimized itself, you've ended your campaign. So that's another one where if you want to test with multiple ones for smaller amounts, and then we sort of as a rule of thumb say you should expect to get any sort of like meaningful return at least 2 weeks. Longer is always better, but 2 weeks is a good sort of rule of thumb.
Yeah. So in terms of this timing, you're running an ad, it's learning how to run it. But let's say you stop it a month in. A year later, could you restart that ad and it's already learned everything? Or is it as if it's like starting from scratch?
So if you're restarting it, sure, then you're keeping the learning. That's something that we, on our platform that we recommend that if you want to pause it, if you're saying I've run out of my budget for now, but I know that in the future I can do it, that's great. We give an option for you to restart or extend for one that's working really well. So the value of that is it keeps the learning. The negative of that is if it's been a year, maybe sort of reader trends have changed slightly. Maybe there's something else in your art, in the language that you're using, in the positioning, that it might be worth saying, yeah, I'm going to lose the learning, but I think I can optimize the positioning for whatever time I'm running it now. So that's always something kind of you're weighing is, do I need to refresh, or do I think this still works?
Okay. And let's move to Instagram. They're owned by the same company, Meta. So we talked a bit about how videos and images do well. Obviously with your book, you've got your book cover. Like that's kind of your big image. But what other types of images can somebody who's a publisher or an author be posting that's related to their book, but it's maybe not, because they don't want to keep sharing the same thing over and over again. So like, what are the other images they could be posting?
So I will say, let's not give up on book covers, only because that immediately tells the person who sees the ad that we're talking about a book. And that's useful. The number of ads sometimes that we see come through, and they're gorgeously designed, but it's not immediately clear that we're talking about a book, means that you could be paying, let's say Meta, for someone to click on your ad, get to your page and think, oh, I didn't realize this was a book. That's not really what I'm interested in. So there's value in that. There's also something you can do is taking elements of your cover art, assuming that, you've already made that investment, and teasing those out, using your cover image in different ways within a larger scope. So, using just your cover image as the full image is great. Using it as sort of like an offset where you're also including maybe a great blurb or a great quote from it. So you're drawing attention to different elements. Also just images of someone holding the book, someone who looks happy reading the book. Keeping in mind that you are trying to connect this to the idea of being something that real people enjoy reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody loves animals, so sometimes people post pictures of like their dog with glasses on, looking like they're reading the book. So I do think that things like that can also work well. I know that on Instagram there's posts, but then there's stories. So what should you be doing? What are the benefits of one over the other?
I think, as with everything else, I think it's worth looking at all of them. I think you have to experiment for your book and the type of audience that you have, which one is going to resonate more. I think sometimes we hear everyone should be using this platform, or everyone should be running this type of ad. And what that usually means is certain people or certain types of books are finding a lot of success with that, but it's never universal. And I think being willing to experiment and test and say, not that, well, everyone says it works, but it didn't work for me. Well, then it didn't work for you. And you don't worry about ever spending time or money on that again. That again goes back to the test things out for a short amount of time. And if they're working, keep going with them. And if they're not, that's okay too. It wasn't a failure on your part. That was you being a savvy marketer and diversifying your initial investment so that you can concentrate on the one that's going to give you the best return.
Personally, I just like doing everything everyone else does. Even if it doesn't work for me, I just want to conform as much as possible.
I
So
mean, there's safety in that,
there,
certainly.
I don't want to stand out. So Facebook and Instagram are both owned by Meta. Is there a benefit to running simultaneous ads?
Sure. I mean, you're reinforcing a little
Mm,
bit. Um, the other thing to be aware of is the Instagram user isn't always the Facebook user, and so you're slightly diversifying your reach there. One of the things that all of the different platforms have is, if you think about this, the classic Venn diagram, except it's tons of circles. There's a lot that overlap, but there's a lot that don't. And the one thing in the middle is your book.
mm.
And so each one of those, you're sort of tweaking towards whatever that platform is and whatever type of audience uses that platform. So, going back to it takes more touch points, it takes more exposure. Maybe the person who sees it on Facebook also saw it on Google. Maybe the person who saw it on Instagram also saw it on Facebook. You're getting more of those in.
Well, so LinkedIn's another popular platform, and I don't think people think as much about it for books, but I will say, in my experience, it feels the most like professional, where I'm like, these are people on here that it's just talking about their business, talking about, as compared to, posting photos of their food or whatever. So is there, a reason that publishers would want to, do advertising on LinkedIn for books?
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think LinkedIn I think so often when we think about advertising books, we default to advertising fiction.
Mm.
And I think nonfiction and LinkedIn can be a great matchup. There are some obvious ones in there. Obviously, you have business books, some of the more prescriptive stuff, but nonfiction in particular, there are so many communities on LinkedIn and so many types of people on there who may be looking for more prescriptive or more nonfiction titles. And that's a great way to meet them in that space and the sort of headspace they're in when they're on LinkedIn.
And I know, like with Facebook and Instagram, like you can do some pretty detailed niche marketing, picking your target audience. How does LinkedIn work? Are you able to pick readers that same like that, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's similar. You're also there kind of using their audience tools to narrow. And again, I will say for all of these, don't be afraid to experiment. And if some of those experiments fail, that's not a reflection on you. That's why you experiment.
Okay. And then one last platform I wanted to ask about that you and I talked about previously was Pinterest. So
Mhm.
tell me about doing ads on there. Why should people consider that?
So if Instagram is visual, Pinterest is super visual. But Pinterest is also, for a lot of people, and we were talking about different search engines beyond Google, ways that people are finding things. Pinterest, for a lot of people, is part of their search process. So it's how they're surfacing a lot of things. There are some obvious types of books that are going to work really well on it. Cooking, nonfiction when it comes to any sort of decorating, any sort of interiors, anything that's hyper visual. But it's also a great place for a lot of genres and books that are beautiful. So if you have an incredible cover, and it's some sort of fiction with an incredible cover or gorgeous cover with nonfiction, if your book's packaging, if one of the selling features is how nice it is to look at, don't be afraid to use that. And be aware of Pinterest, not just as a place where people look at pretty things, but also a place where people are looking for pretty things, for resources, for more information.
Interesting. Okay. So we've talked about a lot of different platforms, and one thing I wanted to get clarification on is, sometimes you have all these new books coming out and people are trying to get the word out to the public about them. But what about older books? You published something 10 years ago and you're like, man, I just didn't get as much sales as I wanted, or maybe sales slowed down. Are any of these platforms, or maybe all of them, things where you go, don't worry, like if people haven't heard of it, they still want to hear about it, or they really care more about brand new books?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of anything. If we're talking about what we call backlist titles, one of the things that I think sometimes can be a disconnect between publishing and readers is that so much of publishing is thinking about the new book that's come out and being aware of that. But for the general reading audience, there's less of an awareness of how new something is. The number of people who discover a brand new book that's been out for several years and it takes off, or it becomes, it hits the book club circuit, or all of a sudden if it's nonfiction, something related to it is in the news and people start discovering it. Those are all things to be aware of, that just because it's not front of mind on the publishing side doesn't mean that that's what the life cycle or attention span of the audience is going to look like. You spend a lot of time and a lot of your marketing energy initially because you're trying to get it out into the world and seed it out there. But for the general reading public, they may not discover it for several years, and that's okay. To them, it's still a new book.
Okay. And then something that you and I have talked about previously that you've said you really recommend is, building your email list. So I know that a lot of these ads are about, book selling, but should you also, and is it also successful just to do ads on any of these platforms that specifically that's the call to action, is just to get people to somehow sign up for your mailing list, through, let's say you give the first chapter away for free, something like that. Is there any particular platform we talked about that's the best for, building your mailing list?
It depends on kind of what are you talking about, like whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or Google for building those? So it depends on the type of books you're doing. If you do a lot of nonfiction, maybe LinkedIn is the place to run those ads to drive them over, because that's the type of audience you have. Fiction, Facebook, Instagram are great places for that. We at Ingram, we really like email because there are fewer gatekeepers to it. You don't, when you send out an email, you're sort of in control of how many people on your list get it or not. And you can tweak whether you can play with things like subject lines, or what day of the week or what time of day you send to try and help your open rates. But you're not trying to get it through another platform. You don't have to get it through Facebook's gatekeeper or, Pinterest or LinkedIn. But in terms of running a campaign to drive signups, those are great places to bring people into your own ecosystem, which is what you're doing with email.
Yeah, and you may not be able to answer this, but I'm wondering, you were talking about that concept of visibility and just getting the word out, and initially they may not just want to buy your book. So I'm wondering is it maybe more successful to think about doing the email campaign just to get people to sign up for the email rather than pushing so hard, just sell the book, because eventually they may buy your books if you just get their email initially and you weren't pushing so hard for just, buy this book.
Yeah, marketing, I think the cross-section of marketing is time on one side and money on the other. And everything that you do in marketing exists somewhere on that line. And email is the long tail marketing. So if you are trying to push sales of your brand new book, then that's where your energy should go into. If you're going to run ads trying to drive email newsletter signups, that's not necessarily going to immediately convert into sales. So that might not be the place to spend your ad money. But if you have now an off season and you want to follow up with maybe you include it in the back matter of your book, so the people who have purchased it, you've given them information why they should follow your newsletter, and now you want to run sort of a mid-season campaign to drive that, that's a great time to do that. It's not going to pay off for maybe your first book. It may not pay off for your second. When we're talking about your third, that's where that starts to convert. And in the meantime, all of those emails that you're doing, that was an organic, free way for you to get one of those touches in that we talk about. So someone may have your email, and they may also then see the Facebook ad, and maybe they have your book following them around on Google. You're getting all those extra touches and you didn't have to pay for all of them. That's why we like email.
Okay. Well, before we finish, want to make sure, IBPA has a really great relationship with Ingram, and we have many different benefits. So we've got an Ingram Spark benefit, in fact, more than one. We have a Lightning Source, and then we have Ingram ID. And members get a 10% discount on advertising through Ingram ID. But people might go, well, what is the advertising? So it fits in perfectly with today's conversation. Can you tell us more about the Ingram ID?
Absolutely. So Ingram ID is our ad platform. and you can advertise on Facebook, on Instagram, on Google Display, and Google Search. We hope to, our next big platform that we'll probably add is Pinterest in the future. You can also purchase email advertising to some of our reader brands that we have, Bookfinity, Little Infinite, Page and Pairing. And what we've done is Ingram Ideas sort of has two use cases. And the first is if you are brand new to digital advertising on those platforms, if you set up a professional account and you get into let's say, running an ad directly through Facebook, it can be overwhelming. And so what we've done is strip out a lot of that and given a pretty guided, simplified version of it. The other use case for that is you're pretty comfortable with Facebook, but you're not as thrilled with your audience targeting options anymore. And what we do with Ingram ID is we let you target to the audiences that we've built on Facebook, Instagram, Google Display, and then we help with Google Search keyword suggestions if you're doing it through that. And what that lets you do is run the ad. We have over 80 audiences. The audiences are organized by the types of book they read. So some of those are the broad categories: romance versus mystery versus U.S. history. Some of those get more granular. So in romance, I think we have 7 or 8 subcategories within there, so you can get pretty targeted. And what that lets you do is choose those audiences. So then when you set up the ad through a guided system and you run it, we deliver it to those audiences of tens of thousands, in some cases up to 1 million readers that we know are people who are looking for books like yours, and they've been looking for books like yours in the past 120 days. So they're recent readers who we are able to say they like the types of books that you're selling.
1 million readers. That would please. I'd love to get, 1 million readers. That'd be great. So one question we do get a lot about Ingram ID is, do you have to have your title posted through Lightning Source or Ingram Spark to be able to use Ingram ID advertising?
No, not at all. In fact, almost 40% of our users, their only relationship with Ingram is they use Ingram ID. Where having a relationship with Lightning Source or Spark comes in handy is when you're building the ad out. If we have your ISBN in one of our systems, you can enter that ISBN and we'll pull through the cover image and some potential suggested copy based on the metadata that you've associated with your title. So it makes some of the steps easier, but if you don't have that in there, you can just upload the whatever art or cover you want to use and then input all of the ad copy that you want to use.
Okay, fantastic. Well, this is a lot of really great information. I prefer writing and publishing books to marketing, so I'm just going to hire you to do my marketing. Thank you. You just got a new job. No, yeah, this is some great information. I hope everybody is, maybe taking notes. And picking one that fits them the best. Don't get overwhelmed thinking you have to do all of them. Just pick the one that, or maybe 2, whatever, that you're like, okay, this is what I feel I can handle. And that way you're not like overextending yourself, trying to do, the best on each one.
Yeah. I like to say, choose the thing you like the most when it comes to marketing, or, when we're talking about platforms, or if you hate all the platforms, consider the one that you hate the least. And don't feel like you have to become great at all of them. Marketing is a full-time job. People make a career out of it. It is not something that everyone should be able to do immediately. And if it is not your thing, that's great. There's so many resources out there. And for people like me who love talking about it and love thinking through it, we love to talk about it with you.
Awesome. Well, I want to make sure everybody checks out Ingram ID. So as I mentioned, we do have a member benefit where it's 10% off advertising. You can go to ibpa-online.org/page/Ingram ID. You can also go directly through Ingram ID, lp.ingramcontent.com/publishers/Ingram-ID. We'll put them for the YouTube one. We'll add those there. Again, Aaron, very, very much appreciate all this great expertise. We hope that people will also become members of IBPA. Thanks for listening to the podcast. You can visit ibpa-online.org to learn about membership. And as I mentioned, we have tons of Ingram, but we also have a lot of other amazing benefits. And then we hope that you'll listen to this podcast. The last Thursday of every month is when it drops on YouTube and then everywhere that you normally download your podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Aaron. I hope you have a wonderful day.